in our area, around the country, with rising deficits. People are uneasy, and they have every right in the world to be anxious about the future of our country, whether they'll have jobs, whether their kids will have jobs, for some people in this room and around the country, whether their grandchildren will have the sort of America that we had when I was growing up and when you were growing up. And there's every reason in the world to be concerned about that, and whether we can replicate to the next generation what we enjoy there in terms of sustaining our existing debt. And so I'm hopeful we'll work on a bipartisan basis on deficits while trying to recreate some of the economic growth in the 1990s, which actually allowed us to balance the federal budget by the year 2000. Secret isn't that tough. It's driving the private sector in terms of employment, letting businesses thrive once again, and curbing spending in ways that are realistic, that are humane, that are fair, respectful of the needs of seniors and veterans and middle-class families, but that are also sustainable long-term in a way that when the Republicans were in Congress earlier this decade, or frankly, I think the Democrats in the last couple of years, haven't recognized the need to restrain spending, to make it affordable for businesses and families and taxpayers going forward. So real quick pitch, I'm proud of the fact that I'm the 5th most centrist member of Congress right now. 5th most. I'm slightly to the right of middle, which tells me that there are people way far to the left that may scare me, and the people way far to the right that scare me. I want to be there in the middle and solve problems. I've tried very hard to work for middle-class families, seniors, veterans, and small business. You may have noticed in the paper a few days ago, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, which is the only veteran service organization that endorses candidates, endorsed my re-election. We're very, very proud of the fact they only endorse people that are very, very pro-veteran. Just so you know, the Jewish War Veterans, which is another fantastic group, and the oldest veterans group in the country, does not endorse political candidates. But trust me, the folks individually from the Jewish War Veterans have been very supportive of me. You'll see just a couple days from now that the leading small business group in the country is going to essentially endorse me. So I've been one of the champions for small business for our country. They don't do that for very many Democrats, as you can imagine, because business tends to be with Republicans, which is fine. It's a reminder to Democrats to be more helpful to business. But I'm one of very few Democrats in the country that's going to be acknowledged by the small business community as having done a good thing to try to create private sector job growth. And one thing I'm very, very proud of, 4 times in the last 8-9 months, the Wall Street Journal has done editorials mentioning me by name, saying John Adler and one other guy named Scott Garrett from North Jersey, a Republican, really have their eye on the ball trying to create private sector job growth. 4 different times the editorials mentioning me, and for a freshman and for a Democrat in the Wall Street Journal to be talked about helping try to grow our private sector, that ain't bad. So I'm happy about that. I'm here very, very bluntly to ask your support. A lot of you have been my friends for a lot of years. Some of you are new friends. Welcome to the Temple, I mean that. You heard people clapping, but we're very, very happy that new people join our synagogue. It's reviving us day after day. It's because of the clergy and the staff, but it's also because of the congregation of people. So you're going to be with a very nice Temple home that the Adler family can attest to, really, really nice people. But frankly, I'm here to ask for your help because Democrats are disillusioned because they thought Obama was going to wave them on and solve all the problems in the country. Republicans are angry because they see unemployment rising and they see deficits very large. And frankly, Republicans are energized politically this year more than Democrats. So I'm asking people, whether Democrats or Republicans, to look at me in terms of my Jewish values, in terms of my small business values, in terms of my middle class values. And I am very middle class. My dad was a dry cleaner in the town of Haddonfield, right next door, right down Crescent Road from here. So I kind of get it from my gut. He died when I was in high school after a series of heart attacks. He did not have health care. He couldn't afford it because, believe it or not, back then health care was too expensive for him with his dry cleaning business. And if you imagine how expensive it was back, how cheap it was back then compared to now, I think you understand why businesses were frustrated that the health care reform didn't do anything in terms of curbing the increase in premiums year to year. There are probably some people in this room who are mad at me because I voted against the health care bill. I will tell you, I thought from the beginning, one of the 2 goals was coverage. The other goal was cost containment so businesses and families could afford their insurance premiums. The bill that passed is now law. I think did a wonderful thing on coverage and utterly failed on cost containment. I said so when the bill first came out. I said so consistently thereafter. I did op-ed pieces. I did a lot of town hall meetings, explained my position. I said it directly to the President of the United States in a half-an-hour conversation in the Oval Office of the White House, which was pretty freaking cool, excuse my language. But to be in the Oval Office to talk to the President of the States was an absolute thrill. We had a very civil conversation for half an hour. Just John Adler and the President of the States. Wish my parents were alive to know that I was allowed to be in the White House at all, even as a tourist, let alone to sit in the Oval Office in 2 adjoining chairs to talk to the President of the States. I've only had a few conversations with the President since he was sworn in. 2 of them were about healthcare and the failure of cost containment. The other 2 were about Israel. Twice, once in October of last year, and once in May of this year, I met with the President of the States. The first time was with the 2 other Jewish representatives from New Jersey, Steve Rothman and Senator Frank Lautenberg. We talked in October about how we were afraid that his rhetoric would be perceived in the Muslim and Arab worlds as hostile to Israel, that America was deserting Israel. I understood the President's rationale and explained it to Steve Rothman and Frank Lautenberg and me. He believed he was actually moving Israel in a good direction that was in Israel's interest. But we believe that the Muslim and Arab worlds would see that as America abandoning its allies in the Middle East, criticizing Israel. And we suggested that was going to be a problem that would not bring the neighboring states, and certainly Hamas, to a bargaining table. We then had a second meeting, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Rothman and I, along with every Jewish member of Congress, the U.S. Senate, with I think just a couple exceptions, unprecedented meeting. Like literally all the Jews from Congress and Senate sitting in one room, I think in late May, in the White House, essentially as respectful as we could, scolding him because we thought his ongoing rhetoric was not going to be helpful to Israel, that some of the comments about the Netanyahu government were going to actually empower not just Hamas, but Fatah on the other side of Israel, and some of the countries that had been somewhat helpful leading towards more reconciliation would be alienated from Israel by some of the President's comments. And you saw a marked change in the President's attitude toward Israel, and you saw a more rapid acceleration of the efforts towards multi-party dialogue and a bi-party dialogue with respect to the peace process after we all met with them. So I met with them on some pretty important topics. I will tell you also, I have been to Israel, I've been more than once, but I was there last August with a bunch of the members of Congress and had a 2-hour meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, met the opposition leaders, Zibi Livni, met the Barak, met the guy who was just Lieberman, that was indicted. We met almost all the top leaders and really got some sense of where Israel was in terms of its politics internally, in terms of its dealing with the West Bank, where frankly things have been good for the last year and a half. There's prosperity, there's security, the wall seems to have worked in a very positive way. That side of the Palestinian equation seems to be going very, very well for the people of Palestine, and we want them to thrive, and for the people of Israel. We clearly want to thrive. The Hamas side, nobody has an answer. And I talked to everybody in Israel, nobody has an answer except containment, and maybe drawing a contrast with the government on the other side, and having people see that the Fatah side is doing a better job actually building the people up and giving them prosperity as a ticket towards happiness, as opposed to the Hamas exploitation and ongoing war with Israel. So I see some real progress there, and I think I had some small role in moving the President of the States in a positive direction on that issue. But I think you need to have people like me in Congress, first of all, who bring Jewish values, whether Jewish or not. I'm not saying vote for me because I'm Jewish, but I am saying vote for someone who shares the values of people in this room, a balanced compassion, tempered with the reality that businesses need to have opportunity to thrive and not be crushed by anti-business rhetoric. I think I get that from my father's experience, from my own experience as a lawyer practicing here, Cherry Hill for a number of years, representing small businesses. I think I'm the sort of person you have wanted to have in the past in government. And I think more so now than a year ago or 2 years ago or in a previous Congress. I think now, as there seems to be this push to the extremes of far left and far right, I think most people in this country want to have people in the middle solving problems, not blaming the other party, but working together hand in hand. You don't see any Republicans, elected officials in Jersey, other than our current governor, who doesn't really know me, and my current opponent, trashing me. You don't see the Republicans who are in Burlington County, Ocean County, saying bad things about me, because they've worked with me, they know I'm a problem solver. Quick example of that, I worked for years to try to get New Jersey to be a smoke-free state in all public places. And so Tom Keene Jr. and I passed a law, but he only worked on it the last couple of years. I worked on it for many, many years to make the buildings the synagogue, American Legion halls, bars, restaurants, almost every place in New Jersey is public, smoke-free. I'm very, very proud of that. That was a problem-solving thing. That wasn't left-wing, that wasn't right-wing. That's the way I approach my opportunity to try to facilitate a better society. So that's my relatively short speech, but I'm hoping when we leave here that you get, if you're not convinced already, you become convinced by the speech and by answering questions, and I'm hoping you'll take that as a call to action. I'm asking you to help me, not just with your vote, but to talk to your friends, your family members, throughout the 3rd Congressional District. Maybe in the last few days before the election, email your friends and say, this is a guy that stands up for what he believes in, says what he's going to do, and then does it. Some of you may know, you've got my robocalls. I've done like 130 town hall meetings. I go bunch in Cherry Hill, Moorestown, Mount Laurel, Evesham, all over this big district, so people can come talk to me so I understand their concerns. So I'm not just voting my limited experience, but I'm hearing experiences of a very diverse constituency and bringing all those experiences to bear to try to help on all the foreign domestic issues that face our society. I think I'm the sort of person you want to have reelected. Please hold your applause. Somebody's raising a hand. You want to go to the first question? No? Sorry.
You clarify that it's the person of American?
No, yeah, but that's a troubling thing. But there's a wave of sort of fear-mongering and hate in this country that's very, very troubling. You heard the rabbi yesterday or Friday night talk about how 40% of Americans blame Jews for the collapse of Wall Street. Is that what it was? Or for 9/11? I mean, some people... Economic downturn. And the rising hatred towards Muslims is not a healthy thing for any minority group in this country. The antipathy towards Mexican Americans because of illegal aliens who are Mexican is also a troubling phenomenon. America has this dual view of itself. We're a very open society, yet we also have this history of starting pushing back on people. That's never been good for Jews anywhere in the history of time. So questions? How are we doing?
Yeah,
Alan's doing. Sorry, Hank. Sorry. You know how Alan gets, so.
Okay. I will try and get to as many questions as I possibly can. First question, John. With almost 50 million people in the United States without health insurance, how do you justify your votes against the health care reform bill?
Fair question. I think I sort of gave part of the answer to that. I'm very, very happy that we've made huge progress in extending coverage to people so they can get preventive care and primary care. I think for many people who didn't have insurance, they wait till they're very, very sick and show up in an emergency room when they could have gotten treated earlier. So that was for them a very inhumane situation, and for society a very costly situation. So I think we did a good thing governmentally to expand coverage. I would make a couple comments on that. I think, frankly, putting that bill ahead of economic recovery, I think has slowed our economic recovery substantially. I think we really should have been focusing on the immediate acute crisis of so many millions of Americans without jobs. And by putting off dealing with the job issue, we extended this recession. And I know technically it's not a recession in terms of economic growth quarter to quarter, but in real terms, 10% unemployment is an absolute recession. And for the families that have been out of work for months, in some cases a couple of years, it's an absolute depression. Not just psychologically, but economically in very devastating terms. So I think I would have done economic recovery first and gone in that all the way, and then put healthcare reform second. Frankly, if you're doing healthcare reform, I think you should have done both pieces of it. The two pieces that always were coverage and cost containment, and they did a very good job on coverage. I have no quarrel with how they did that for that piece of it, other than some of the burdens they put on small business in terms of 1099s. Overall, the coverage piece is very, very good. But to not contain costs, to not fix the insurance marketplace, and not to fix the underlying cost of healthcare delivered in our country, to not fix the reimbursement model, to not realign incentives in a way so the doctors and hospitals are on the same page, so that you don't treat for volume and get reimbursed by more, you get reimbursed by results. I think we really missed a big chance there. I said at the beginning, thinking they would fix that part. I said along the way, I met with the president twice on it, and I think they got hunkered down and just doing one piece of it and kind of missed the other piece of it. And I think for many businesses, as they see the premiums go up 15 or 20 or 25% a year, it means they're not going to hire some extra person. So I think we actually caused real harm to real people who are unemployed right now, and small business people in are nodding their heads because they know it costs them so much to cover their employees. They want to do the right thing, but if it's going up 20% a year, each year they think, well, maybe I should cut back on the quality of the coverage, raise the co-pays a little bit, dumb down the quality of the program. But I know businesses, probably in this room, but around our area, that have dropped coverage to employees because they just can't afford it. So if you don't deal with the cost part, you're just shifting the problem to somebody else. Now I know that the bill became law, now requires people either to cover their employees or to pay a penalty. I'm afraid that because costs could go up so much, businesses will just opt to pay the penalty rather than cover the employees. The goal isn't, to punish businesses. The goal is to cover employees in a way that's affordable, that doesn't drag down our economy. So I think we just completely missed one half of a two-part equation. When I went to school, you get one right, you get one wrong, that's 50%, that's an F. I didn't want to vote for an F, I wanted to vote for a B+, a C-, didn't always get straight A's, a C- would have been okay. So I know there are people in the street that thought absolutely vote yes no matter what. I had a primary fight in my election in June because a liberal thought I had failed the liberals, I had sort of rejected my base and betrayed them. I think I was actually looking out for the real interests of the middle class of our society. When businesses can't hire people because they can't afford the coverage, that means middle class people won't have jobs. Or they'll have lower pay increases year to year or no pay raises year to year because businesses are shifting the money from salary and wages over to benefits, and the family's not taking any more money home to get the same level of benefits, and they're still losing the benefits.
As a follow-up to that question, has your voting against the medical bill affected your relationship and support from the Democratic Party?
Yes, for some. In money terms, it really absolutely devastated my fundraising, frankly. A lot of people that gave me money in 2008 told me I'm not going to give you money ever again because I wanted a liberal, I got you. So it absolutely did. And literally people, person after person said, never again, you're dead to me, go away, don't call me again. Now I have people that like me a lot that still tell me don't call me again for the rest of the money too. So it's not just on healthcare though, let's understand. But I've had many people say on that vote, you failed, never again. That's just a shame. As I mentioned, I had a primary fight, and 25% of the people or 20% of the people voting primary voted against me. I think I've been working hard and doing a good job and I've been accessible to people, but some percentage of people voted against me, as is their right. I'm now being criticized by my opponent as being a super liberal, which I think is ironic considering the fact that liberal people were mad at me because I wasn't a liberal, but that's what politics is. But yes, it's absolutely hurt me. I will tell you, however, in my town hall meetings, it was overwhelmingly against the bill. Now, some of the people wanted the bill to fail because they wanted to tear down President Obama. Some people wanted the bill to fail because they were Republicans, they wanted Democrats to fail. I don't want to say that there was just one reason why people wanted to vote no. But I heard from many business people, including people in this room, that the way they saw the bill was going to hurt their business rather than help their business. And retard their hiring of one new person or 3 new people rather than give them the tools where they can afford over a couple of years to hire some new person. And so I thought it was going in the wrong direction. And I think the majority of the people in this district, for the various reasons, an overwhelming majority of people agree with my position for their own motives.
This question ties into today's newspaper in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I guess it's good news, you made the front page. But it seemed that the article was written that was somewhat negative about your communication spending with your constituents.
Every member of Congress has allotted a certain amount of money to spend on travel, on equipment, on technology, on salary, on communications to voters, on, I guess, a couple of the things that would fall under the general portfolio of governmental responsibilities. I've chosen to keep my salaries low. I think probably the lowest of any member of Congress in New Jersey. I try to reach out to people because in a very angry, anxious time, I thought it was my responsibility to let people have access to me for robocalls so they know where I was, they come talk to me or yell at me. And lots of people have come and yelled at me about lots of different things, some of which I have some control over, some of which, like the questions about Obama being a Muslim, I get those questions too. But I've tried to communicate what I believe, where I stand on various issues, and give access to people who reach out to me, whether it's on big issues or whether it's on an issue involving they need help with the government on a passport or on a tax problem or on a social security problem. So I've tried to allocate my money in a way that would reach out to people. And frankly, having done that, I still was the 5th lowest spender of all the members of Congress in New Jersey, and gave a lot of my money back, did not reach the level of spending that a lot of other people did, thinking that in tough times I shouldn't spend all the money that Congress has allotted itself. So that's how I chose allocating money. Frankly, had I known it was going to be a political, bollocks on paper, I probably would have spent a little bit less. But if the article had been about salaries, I would have been at the very, very bottom, and people would have said, great for John Adler, he's a cheap employer.
This question. The surge of the Tea Party is frightening. You covered a little bit in your intro. Many Americans are so disgusted with our present government, they'll vote for any so-called outsiders because they're desperate for change. Your comments?
I think that's exactly right. I worry that people seek a change they aren't going to like when they see it. There's sometimes we need less government, and I embrace the idea of less government where it's appropriate. And so I've voted against a lot of the spending bills that come through Congress, and I understand some of the Tea Party people who just want less government, bring down costs. That notion, said abstractly, is very, very valid, although you keep having to spend for things that are vital. I worry that Tea Party people, in their zeal to cut government, will look at things like foreign aid and decide that foreign aid is a relevant thing to fund, and therefore they'll decide to cut money to Egypt because Egypt's not really that democratic, to say the least. Not in a partisan sense, but in an election sense. But when you do that, Egypt and Israel are pretty closely tied in terms of foreign aid. And if you cut Egypt, they're going to end up cutting Israel as well. So I worry that sometimes when people say they cut, some of those cuts matter. You want to have enough money spent on national security, so the next time there's a threat to our country, we catch it in advance, and we don't make drastic mistakes like deciding to go into a war in Iraq because they're developing weapons of mass destruction, which it turns out after our 5 or 6 or 7 years of scouring, there wasn't one. There wasn't one weapon mass. And I've seen Scud missiles in Israel that were sent from Iraq. I get that, but they weren't the weapons of mass destruction that caused us to lose thousands of American lives and $1 trillion plus, and we still have 50,000 folks on the ground in Iraq, not active duty, fighting a war now. Now they're sort of doing a police action and training, but there's still 50,000 Americans there because we made a mistake. We haven't spent quite enough money on military intelligence to know the facts before we engaged in a war that cost us. So I worry about it. I also worry the divisiveness. Whenever you have people screaming, it's hard to actually work together well. People screamed in this country. I'm not going to talk about other countries because that brings back some horrifying thoughts for Jews. But in our own country, people were screaming a lot in the 1840s and 1850s. And they stopped talking to each other and we had a civil war. I'm not suggesting for a second we're going to have a civil war in this country, but I can imagine a breakdown in government when you continue to have people on the extremes. And I'm not even going to talk Tea Party. Even just having Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner sit in a room together and civilly try to decide how to solve a problem, it's almost unthinkable. I worry about these extremes not being able to talk to each other, and the Tea Party makes John Boehner look almost like a rational person. So it's a troubling trend.
It's an informational question. Please tell us what committees you are on and what are your major areas of interest.
Thanks. I'm on 2 committees. I'm on the Committee on Financial Services, and I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Briefly about each. The Financial Services Committee, which is chaired by Congressman Barney Frank, passed a couple really good laws over the last several months. One was a credit card reform law. Until we passed a law, credit card companies were allowed to change interest rates and charge fees and shift the terms of the deal with you because the fine print on page 6 of the contract you signed, not knowing it's a contract, when you got your credit card, or worse yet, when your 18-year-old college kid got a credit card for the first time. America was being hurt by that. And we built up a lot of debt, had a lot of huge fees and interest pile on, and the committee in which I served led the fight. We passed a bill, Senate passed it, it's now the law for our country, very popular, doing a good job over time, is going to protect Americans from abuse by credit card companies, which has caused an enormous number of financial bankruptcies, as people have built up big debt that they couldn't get out of, in part because of their lack of responsibility, but also in part because interest and fees ran out of control in ways that they didn't see happening until it was too late to solve. More broadly, we passed a bill which is a re-regulation of Wall Street. I don't think anyone in this room, I don't think any rational person in this room would suggest that Wall Street was sufficiently and well regulated in the year 2006 or 2007. As a result of that, we had things go on with credit default swaps, which ended up, and probably most people in this room didn't even know what a credit default swap was in 2006 and 2007. Apparently neither did the SEC under President Bush, or the Federal Reserve to some lesser extent, because we've now all suffered for financial loss. Everybody in this room, your house is worth less now than a couple years ago. And part of that wasn't just Fannie and Freddie and mortgage brokers giving mortgages to people who deserve it. Part of it was Wall Street packaging those mortgages in these very exotic derivatives that cost us all money in ways that just Fannie and Freddie buying bad mortgages from people would not have happened. So our committee passed a bill, the Senate then passed a very similar bill, which is now law, which I think will protect us from a new wave of giant bank foreclosures, of the necessity to even talk about a bailout of an AIG or of all these companies that we bailed out. And by the way, they're going to start. I think that will not happen again because we did adequate regulation. This had not been done in our country since the 1930s. During the Great Depression, one of the great things that Congress, the New Deal Congresses did in the 1930s was to properly regulate banks and lending. And for a number of years, that really served us well. Over the last 10, 15 years, we sort of broke some of that down with changing the Glass-Steagall Act in the 1990s, getting rid of the net capital requirement in 2005 under the SEC. These little things that don't mean a lot to you really devastated you, really hurt you. And so Congress acted wisely and responsibly to try to fix that in ways that will not recur until some Congress 40 years from now, or if the Tea Party is in charge 1 year from now, breaks that stuff down and thinks laissez-faire capitalism on its own works. It didn't. We know the consequence. It cost you money, so we're trying to prevent that. Other committee on Veterans Affairs, we have in our area, including in this room, an enormous number of veterans. And we can't get young people to join Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines unless we treat veterans well. That's not my idea. George Washington said that 230 years ago. But I wanted to get a committee that would honor veterans both for their own sake, in terms of education, economic opportunities for them, healthcare for them, but also so young people see how we treat our veterans of any age, so that young people will want to sign up in an all-volunteer armed forces to keep us safe and free. Israel has a different way, mandatory compulsory service. That works. We chose not to do that when I was almost draft eligible, right before I was draft eligible. We covered the draft. But since we have a system of volunteers, we have to make sure volunteers feel there's a reason for them to go in. I want to get a committee that makes sure people still want to stand up and fight for our country so this Bill of Rights can last for another couple hundred years or longer.
How does the current attempt at a Mideast peace look to you? And then the follow-up question on it is, again, will Israel be asked to make the most concessions?
Well, it's a two-part question. Having been in Ramallah and sat with Prime Minister Fayed, some member of Congress back in August of last year, I'm really encouraged that the Fatah government in the West Bank wants to have peace. They've got more prosperity now in the last year or so than they've ever had. I drove around there and saw construction projects where young men were working. Those are the young men who otherwise would have been strapping the bottom of themselves and going to a pizza parlor or a coffee shop or getting on a bus in Jerusalem or in one of the smaller towns. But instead, they now go to work. Work seems to calm people down. You've got some reason to get up in the morning other than to bomb yourself and your enemy. That's a good thing. So I think what Netanyahu's tried to do has worked. I think what Fayed has tried to do has worked. And I think on that side, there's every legitimate prospect of a possibility of stability. I'm not quite saying peace, but stability there. I'm hearing that from the Prime Minister of Israel and the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. I don't have any positive hope for Gaza. It is a bunch of tenements where people are coached year to year to hate. They're taught that everything about their squalor, about their poverty is caused by Jews living in Israel. So they're taught from very young anti-Semitism and anti-Israel feelings, fueled by this Hamas, anti-Israel hatred, which is an awful thing. America made a horrible mistake in President Bush's excitement about democracy. He was going to export democracy around the world. You might recall he was the one that insisted that the Palestinians have an election. And Abbas was saying, no, Fatah will lose that election. Let's not have an election right now. Let's just sort of string it along for a few more years. President Bush said, no, we have to have an election and prove that American values can be exported successfully around the world. They had an election, and the bad guys won. Fatah said, the bad guys are going to win. Don't have this election. The Gaza's been hypnotized by Hamas. And you know, what everybody predicted would happen, happened. And we're just stuck. And no one has an answer. I didn't ask, somebody sitting next to me asked Prime Minister Netanyahu, what's the answer for that? He said, I don't know. Containment. We show them that we're doing well on the West Bank, and over time, people will see what's going on there and say, I want that, rather than living in a tenement where I've got no future for my kids. That's the answer for now.
Staying on the international topic, I'd like to read two cards that are sort of similar. One, do you think Obama's policy of engaging Iran has been successful? What would you do if you were president? And then the next question is, do you think negotiating with Iran over nuclear weapons will work? And if not, what should we do?
I think this has been a crisis that's been growing for the last several years. I understand why a new president came in and tried to engage Iran and to engage sort of the major powers in the region to work with us to contain Iran. I think there's been some success with dialogue with Russia, less so with China, to try to engage them in some containment measure. There's clearly been no success whatsoever with Iran. Iran is hell-bent on developing this program and is brazen about it at this point. And I don't know what we can do other than the economic sanctions, other than energy sanctions. At some point, we should seriously consider a naval blockade of the importation of gasoline into Iran. I don't want to kid you in saying that. I don't want to say that casually, because that is an act of war. Naval blockade is an act of war, just the way bombing all the facilities would be an act of war. It's not as, acutely hostile, but when we block somebody's ships from coming in, that is an act of war. It's less bloody than bombing sites because, like other dictatorships, Iran's been very clever about putting orphanages and schools and child care centers right at the sites of all the tunnels coming down in the ground, so that if Israel or America bombs those sites, we're hurting little innocent kids rather than taking out weapons of mass destruction before they're perfected. We have been successful in this Congress in putting in very tough economic sanctions, which seem to be having some effect on some of the businesses in Iran or some of the businesses in Europe that have been doing business with Iran. But I'm not optimistic. I don't think there's a short-term strategy. President Bush struggled with it and couldn't find one. President Obama struggled with it, can't find one. I would hate to think that we'd have to be in a war in there at some point. Frankly, because we're already overstretched in terms of our military abilities. The war in Afghanistan, the mid-Afghanistan, is going just okay, to be honest with you. Despite our efforts, it's going just okay. It's the idea we might, in fact, be put into some military capacity in Iran is very unpleasing. Having said that, extermination of Israel by nuclear arms is a lot more frightening. It's clearly an existential threat to Israel. And frankly, that's one place where Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors have a coalition of interest. They all fear a Persian Shia Iran with nuclear capacity. And so there's been a lot of good dialogue between the Sunni Arab nations in the region and Israel, all of them sort of saying, go drop the bomb on Iran. We're going to have to yell at them publicly, but go drop the bomb, please. I don't want Israel to have to do that. When I was there in August, we were briefed about that prospect. I don't want Israel to have to do that. So I'm hoping economic sanctions can keep being ratcheted up in a way that enhances the prospect of Iran turning away from nuclear arms development.
Yeah, I think 2 years ago we had the Israeli consul here, and when we talked about Iran, he said he felt that if we didn't bomb them, they'd have to bomb them to take out their nuclear capabilities. Getting back to some of the domestic issues, do you feel the president is correct to make a stand against extending the tax cuts to people making more than $250,000?
That's a very close call. I'll tell you honestly, I know every Republican's for extending the tax cuts, the 2001, 2003 tax cuts for everybody. Some politically vulnerable Democrats have taken the same position, whether it's for philosophical reasons or political reasons. I accept generally the notion that in any time it's better to have low tax rates, so I accept that notion. But I'm looking at what happened when we cut those taxes in 2001, 2003, and didn't create new private sector jobs. The whole idea of cutting those taxes, cutting taxes is a nice thing if you can also cut spending and balance budgets, but cutting taxes was designed to create private sector jobs. And in fact, in the beginning of this decade, we did not create private sector jobs. This was the first decade where even before this Great Recession, we had lost private sector jobs. So the history of this decade suggests that those sort of tax cuts don't necessarily cut jobs. I think we're asking the question too broadly. I think we should look at which sort of tax cuts will actually create jobs, which will incent companies to expand, to buy new products and services or hire new people, and which ones are just sort of a nice thing to give to rich people in the hope that a little bit of it gets spent around society. And it's really hard to evaluate each one of those on their own merits. I think we should keep the capital gains tax, the dividends tax rates low and keep them coupled, not separate one into ordinary income, the other one's capital gains, to incent savings, even for the richest in our society. I think we should do more to protect subchapter S owners and small business owners, because they are the job creators of society. But I'm not sure that whether tax cuts to the rich are more helpful to us than would be dedicating that money to deficit reduction. So I'm really sort of, I don't want to say I'm ecumenical on this, I want to say I'm really trying to think it through to get it right. I know the politics of it is cut every tax, I get that. But I'm not sure that's in our long-term interest of society. We have massive deficits. We can't just cut domestic spending enough to fix our deficit problem. That doesn't do it. If we cut domestic spending out completely, that wouldn't solve our deficit problem. So we have to find ways with revenue, with entitlement reform, and with domestic spending cuts to make it work longer term. So I don't want to give the political answer on what is a very difficult question 44 days before an election.
I have a number of cards that have questions that ask about our debt burden. And, this one I'll read. Do you believe that the value of the dollar can be kept from tanking in the international market, considering the huge federal debt which we have, and what is the solution?
I have enormous optimism about our country. We'll figure ways out of this in terms of our economy. We'll have new entrepreneurs who figure it out. People keep being raised in society or moving to the society and helping our society. But I think debt poses a very large potential crisis that we have time to avert. Which is why in my previous answer I didn't want to say let's just cut every tax. I think that's not. I think we have to look at each tax in terms of whether it will help create jobs. If it creates jobs, people have wages, then they get taxed. And if they're fairly taxed, some of that money goes back to the government to offset our deficit in a good way. But I'm worried that if we just cut taxes without actually cutting spending, which either Republicans or Democrats ever seem to be willing to do, that would really exacerbate our debt problem. So I'd like to look at entitlement reform, domestic spending reform, frankly military spending reform, and all those things together in a way, because I think short-term unemployment is an absolute crisis, the long-term debt is a growing crisis that we just can't ignore. And I think people of both parties would be too quick to sort of say, that's the other side's fault. We're not going to help solve the problem. It's just their fault. We have this big debt. So I think we should try to be a little more sober about this and wait till after election and actually deal with the problem rather than cutting every tax the way some people are proposing.
This question is, how do you propose to build a greater segment of those in the center working together?
I think I'm doing it with this conversation, in part. I think, first of all, I don't think you've ever heard me in my year, whatever it is now, 9 months in office, ever criticize the Republicans. You never heard me once say the Democrats are just always good and the Republicans are always bad. My mom was a Republican, my dad was a Democrat. I saw both sides going on. They both my parents were wonderful people, bless their memory. But I heard it from both sides. There's some good and some dopey in both sides. Some idiots and some crooks on both sides, and there's some really good people in both sides. You've never heard, I don't speak on the House floor very often, you've never heard me say something that sounds harshly partisan. And when other people have talked about on the House floor, every single time Republicans mention my name, it's we need more Democrats in Congress like John Adler who are bipartisan and want to solve problems. And like 3 or 4 people have made speeches about that guy over there, he's one of the good ones. We need more guys like him. I think that's part of it. It's never demonizing another party like they're full of villains or idiots or somehow against America. There's too much of that from people on the left and too far people on the right who think they can get political advantage in the short term by saying we good, they bad. I think Al-Qaeda is bad. I think Hamas is bad. I think poverty is bad for us altogether. I don't think Republicans are bad. I think they are a political party trying to help America. Once you start demonizing the other party, you can't work with the other party. You can't then say, I was just kidding when I said you were a rat bastard. Let's go solve problems. So you never, ever, ever hear me do that. I'm a little rough with my opponent, he's a little rough with me, but I'm not rough with the Republicans because I think once you start doing that, you're going down a path where you can never work together to solve America's problems.
Mary's told me we have one more question, so I'm sorry if I didn't get to everybody else's question. John, I think you'll like this question. How are you able to be a successful parent and a successful politician?
First of all, both are great privileges, and both have certain responsibilities. So I'm going to go to Oliver Adler's soccer game on the Deku fields in an hour or so, take off the blazer and cheer like a parent, and then go to some house parties in Ocean County and ask people to vote for me. I think the most important job I'll ever have is to be a parent. So I know that everything else is secondary. I was a lawyer for a lot of years, had a lot of important clients, treated them well, but my first responsibility was my 4 kids. And my wife, at least shout out, but because somebody could tell her, Rabbi Newberg, somebody could tell that. But I think that's my first responsibility. Having done that, it's also a privilege to serve in government, to facilitate things, to try to build a society that's humane, that's respectful, that's safe, that promotes public education, that promotes a cleaner environment, that tries to heal our world in small ways and in big ways, and try to promote understanding and respect in a very troubled and troubling time. So some of the lessons I try to teach my kids, I also then try to live in my role in government so that I can be the example to them that I would want them to have. So far so good. My 4 kids like me, we talk a lot, we all get along well. I was sad my 2 big boys didn't come back from college for Rosh Hashanah or for Yom Kippur. We did Skype with one of my kids during a Seder last year, that was very fun. One of my kids came up from Maryland, my other kid, my Harvard kid, we had to put him on the computer, so we did part of the Seder. He didn't mind the drinking part at all over the internet. It was a good thing. But it's a great responsibility. Probably also would say hi to Oliver as I leave here because he's in Sunday school right now. So thanks. Welcome new members. Thank you all. Please vote for me. I'll help America. Please vote for me.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.